Welcome to Crossroads. Was the Chinese military trying to manufacture so-called super soldiers using our DNA? Well, it turns out a program is being exposed that does reveal a CCP plot where they wanted to improve population quality using the DNA of Americans, including from COVID tests. Now, speaking of threats from the Chinese Communist Party, also the regime is exporting its social control system abroad, including systems to censor the internet. And some countries are putting internet censorship in place from the Chinese Communist Party. And meanwhile, yet another former top official could soon face criminal charges. Former CIA Director John Brennan has been referred for charges of allegedly making false statements, part of a bigger pattern we're seeing taking place. I'll be talking about these stories a lot more today, so make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment below, and let's jump into it. Now, first off, a Chinese Communist Party military plot is being exposed, and this is for, quote, improving population quality. And guess what they're using to improve the population quality? The DNA of Americans. And the program is being referred to as experiments to manufacture super soldiers. Now, the story is from a former CIA trained case officer, also former CTO for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and he's writing in Daily Mail. It says this: the Nifty test, which is what they call it, a brand name product of BGI Genomics, was developed in China with the support of the People's Liberation Army. The PLA, of course, the main military of the Chinese Communist Party. Technically, it's the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party tasked with defending the Communist Party itself. Turns out they were working on this. And it says the genetic information obtained ostensibly to detect Down syndrome and other chromosome abnormalities in unborn children is also used by the Chinese military in areas including what it chillingly calls improving population quality. Awkward, right? Now, it says it has not been approved in the US, but it is available everywhere else globally, in Europe, Canada, Australia. And it says our biggest adversary by far is now China. Unlike our enemies in the past, China is just as likely to target my wife, he says, and son, as its intelligence officers or the military politicians who run our nation. And, it said those threats emanate from the cell phone I carry, from my son's video game system, from our healthcare system, our banks, and our television sets. And notes this, interestingly: the case of BGI Genomics is terrifying enough, but it doesn't just affect mothers. Reuters reported that this same company has sold millions of COVID tests globally, including into the American market. Raising really big questions, I'll add. If you were taking a COVID test, were you actually helping the Chinese Communist Party build super soldiers using your DNA? Maybe with some of them. But it notes this: the Chinese Communist Party can legally take any information, any data it wants from any Chinese company. So your genetic information could be used to create a class of super soldiers or even super geniuses in China. Even scarier, China could create diseases that affect only specific ethnic populations. They could target white people or black people or Hispanics using, again, DNA-targeted bioweapons. Now, those of you who watch Crossroads for a while know that I've talked about a lot of this before. I've discussed the Chinese Communist Party's programs on many of these fronts. It is actually true, as crazy as it sounds. The Chinese Communist Party has open programs where they are experimenting to create biometric targeted bioweapons. Biological weapons like diseases that only target specific races. And part of that, of course, would be to depopulate certain countries, launch an attack on a country, and maybe kill off the local population or an unwanted population and keep the ones they want. The CCP openly even talks about this, raising the question, why do we let them get this data? Why do we let our companies send American DNA to China when we know they're doing this? But look, it's not even just bioweapons, and they talk about it openly. This isn't even like conspiracy. They have publicly available reports on it. Like, they talk about it, which is actually ridiculous as well, because they're technically part of the bioweapons agreement. They're not supposed to be developing bioweapons, but they just talk about it openly, and we keep trading with them. But there's more on this as well. It also ties into surveillance. biometric surveillance, your retina scans, your facial scans, your fingerprints, your DNA, everything. And when you're dealing with, normal societies, maybe that's not such a big deal. You go to the airport, you look into the camera, they take your picture. We're kind of used to this kind of stuff. It's a little different in China, where they have this huge system, they call it the Skynet system, of just surveillance cameras literally everywhere. It is Big Brother in real life. You're being constantly monitored. And when you log onto the internet and you have to use like your smartphone, which is tied to your health data, tied to your social credit system, tied to everything else, you're greeted with a little cartoon police officer pointing to their eyes, reminding you, you are being watched. And nobody seems to take issue with the fact the Chinese Communist Party is doing this, and the fact that even a lot of companies right here in the United States are even sending American DNA to China so that we can all be added to this wonderful system as they try to export it abroad, because they are doing it. And look, not all these companies directly work with the CCP or its military. Like if you're in China, they might say, well, we don't work with the PLA. It's a moot point. The reality is this: the laws of the Chinese Communist Party require that you grant the CCP access to all data. If you're an American business doing business in China, if you're a tech company, if you're a social media company, and you're gathering information on your users, which all of them do because, it's how they make money. Oftentimes they sell it to advertisers. The CCP can access all of that. And you might say, well, look, this social media company doesn't work in China. It's a moot point. Can't be used for surveillance. Can't be used for bioweapons. Well, here's the problem with that. A lot of these big tech companies sell their data. They sell your data. Or they sell it to third parties, which then sell it. And what happens? You have companies, Chinese companies, that just buy it. They buy it, they use it, and you might say, well, the CCP is not buying it. Yeah, but if a Chinese company buys it, the CCP is required to have access to it. Meaning, all the data being scooped up by just about everything is being transferred to the Chinese Communist Party, or at least is allowed to be transferred to it. And again, Chinese Communist Party data laws allow them to do it. There's not much pushback on it. In the United States, we relatively allow it to happen. We even work with many of these companies. And we know it's being tied not only into bioweapons, but just about every form of totalitarian censorship that we can possibly imagine. And speaking of threats in the Chinese Communist Party on that point, guess what? Those social control systems are no longer just Chinese. They're everywhere. Coming to a local city near you, including systems to censor and control the internet. PBS even said this. They said for years, China's government has used what's known as the Great Firewall to censor the internet inside its country and block access to select foreign websites. Interesting point with this, a lot of major tech companies helped the Chinese Communist Party build this. Now, if you helped a communist regime do something like this, what would normally happen to you? Well, maybe, if they carry out human rights abuses, arrest people, torture people, murder people for their organs, in the future you could face punishment for it. Currently nothing like that is happening in terms of punishment. All the crimes are happening. But we'll see in the future, because now these companies working with the Chinese Communist Party are helping the CCP build and launch a system globally. An eternal night spreading over the world unless we do something about it. Now, PBS says this. Now, a document leak shows that a little-known Chinese company is exporting these tools to other countries. Among them, it says Myanmar, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and Ethiopia. You might say, well, who cares? These are kind of countries on their side of the equator anyways. Not really. You even have some first world countries adopting the Chinese Communist Party's social controls. Now it says this. J.E. Yong, senior writer of Wired, said this, quote, so this is a trove of over 100,000 documents that came from anonymous leaks. And collectively, we see that this document coming from a Chinese company, Geej Network, shows that they have very advanced capability to monitor the internet traffic that goes into a whole country, everything, and that they're trying to sell and have succeeded in selling this technology to some foreign governments. Now you might say, well, You know, the problem with intercepting everything is you have to sift through it. In the past, that was actually a big problem of mass surveillance systems. I will say in my previous reporting, I've exposed the CCP doing this. They steal data even going across the entire internet infrastructure. Landing stations on, again, you know, like these Ethernet centers, bringing the internet into entire countries. When you go underwater, you bring it up to the surface. You have these facilities that then redirects it to the country. A lot of those are actually controlled with the Chinese Communist Party's military once they make landfall in China. There's also been some findings, I've reported on it exclusively, that even internet switches within the infrastructure are being intercepted by the Chinese Communist Party. They're actually stealing data going across the entire internet, meaning encrypted, unencrypted, secure, unsecure, hacker in your company, spy in your company, or just a Chinese spy working abroad, it makes no difference. We've given them access to it. And even more so when it comes to like information being transmitted to satellites, it's been shown they're also intercepting that, meaning your cell phone and stuff, in other words. Now, look, alongside the CCP's Belt and Road Initiative, this is important too. The Chinese Communist Party is going to different countries, helping them say, hey, let's build you a stadium, let's build you a freeway, let's build you whatever, right? Quick update on Latin America. You might remember when I was in Panama investigating mass illegal immigration, I went to the Darien Gap, and I showed you all some footage that they were building a huge superhighway bridging the Darien Gap, a future highway that will just facilitate mass illegal immigration from South America. Meaning they won't have to go through the Darien Gap anymore like walking. They can just drive. They can hop in a bus and do it. My sources have sent me some videos of this. They finished building it. That bridge there, at least one of them, not the entire gap, but one of the main bridges is now complete. But important point with this, the Chinese and that's actually partly built by the CCP. They're actually one of the companies involved. Now, important point with this, though, when the CCP goes to, let's say, you know, South America, when they go to Africa, when they go to parts of Asia, and they build this infrastructure, they also put into place the different systems of surveillance, the different systems like the social credit system, the different things built into the internet infrastructure for censorship, surveillance, everything else. In other words, internally, within all this infrastructure, the Chinese Communist Party is building and exporting its system of social control. And this has been going on for many years. Many countries already have it. Many major companies are working with them on it, including some of the big American tech companies. And even some Western countries have put in place some parts of the Chinese Communist Party's social credit system. We hear about it like it's a horror story. You know, you have a good citizen, bad citizen rating. If you're Muslim and you don't buy alcohol, you're on the naughty list. If you're a normal, just kind of everyday Chinese citizen and you buy alcohol, you might be on the naughty list. Meaning, they don't want you to be religious, but if you're not religious, they don't want you drinking alcohol either. They have other things too, like maybe, for example, you're friends with somebody who supports democracy. You're friends with somebody who supports Taiwan. Doesn't have to be you. They lower your social credit score through your connection. If you have a family member who believes in a religion the CCP doesn't like, they lower your score. And through that, they incentivize you to go and harass them. They incentivize you to go and say, why don't you support the CCP? They incentivize you to go on the internet and post CCP propaganda because it raises your social credit score. And what do you get? You get tiny little dog treats, right? Like Pavlov's dog. You get little doggy treats. You get access to the high-ranking dating websites of the Chinese Communist Party. You're allowed to use the bus. Wow, amazing, right? You can use bikes. And so access to the normal system is denied unless you're a good citizen under the Chinese Communist Party. And that means playing its little games and eating its little doggy treats and playing everything it wants to do. Now, interestingly, they've also exported this to some countries. Darwin, Australia, for example, has implemented parts of the social credit system from China. You have Chinese police patrolling the streets in some countries in Europe. They even had an exchange program in Rome and Italy. The Chinese Communist Party is exporting this model, the China model, abroad. Now, look, meanwhile, yet another former U.S. top official could soon face criminal charges in what's becoming a big pattern. Former CIA Director John Brennan has now been referred for charges for allegedly making false statements. We'll be talking more about what's happening after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. In what is becoming a broader pattern right now, another top former official is facing criminal charges. Former CIA Director John Brennan has now been referred for charges of allegedly making false statements. Now you could say not a major charge, false statements. When Trump was, of course, in office, or when Biden was in office, you had, of course, a lot of people not speaking to Congress facing charges. It's not a huge charge. But what's important is the pattern. The Federalist says this. It says the House Judiciary Committee referred former CIA Director John Brennan to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution on Tuesday over allegations that he, quote, knowingly made false statements to Congress about his role in the Russia collusion hoax. Now you might say, why does that matter? It's a little slap on the wrist charge, making false statements. Here's why it matters. The investigations into the Russian collusion hoax, the entire scandal in 2015, 2016, trying to say that Donald Trump was working with Russia to, again, rig elections through false information and spread disinformation and hack servers and so on. It was all fake. The whole thing was fake. The problem is that there were many false statements made by top-level officials saying it was all real. Turns out they were lying. And the big issue now is that, well, that's under investigation. So if they can get criminal charges, what does that mean? It means it affirms a certain narrative. This person knowingly lied. This person knowingly retained documents, classified documents, and withheld them. This person knowingly did this person knowingly did that. And what happens when you have many people knowingly committing crimes in conjunction with a broader conspiracy? Well, you call that racketeering. You call that a conspiracy against maybe the government in this case. You call that possibly even a type of insurrection, a revolt against government power, especially when you're trying to use it to overthrow the government, President Trump at the time, removing him from office through impeachment, backing those claims, spreading these narratives, investigating them using many times unlawful means, and coordinating in a giant campaign to upend basically the choice of the American people. In other words, revolting against the Constitution of the United States and our entire system of integrity and elections. That's why this matters. Now, they're not there yet, but that is part of the narrative coming out from the Trump administration. And when it comes to, again, what we're seeing with the former CIA Director John Brennan, it says this. In the letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi obtained by the Federalist, Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, argued that, quote, Brennan made numerous willfully and intentionally false statements of material fact contradicted by the record established by the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the CIA. And added, quote, making false statements before Congress is a crime that undermines the integrity of the committee's constitutional duty to conduct oversight. Now it notes, the referral highlights numerous instances in which Brennan allegedly issued untrue remarks when testifying before the Judiciary Committee in May of 2023. It notes that among them are comments the former CIA director made when discussing his agency's role in helping craft the 2017 Intelligence Community Assessment that advanced the false narrative that Russia developed a clear preference for Donald Trump and aspired to help him win the 2016 election. In other words, Brennan's being basically accused of lying about one of the core elements in the entire Russia collusion hoax. And if it's shown that he lied knowingly, because that would have to be, how they get him on it, you can't really lie unknowingly. It just means you weren't well informed. Lying knowingly means he actually lied. If they get him on that, then it ties into the bigger question of what did he really know? What was really going on? Why would he say that? Maybe we'll see those investigations because they are talking about it. Because guess what else? This is part of a broader pattern. And this is what's important. Let's go over it. Former FBI Director James Comey indicted. He's actually trying to get the case thrown out saying it's selective prosecution. Like, hey, you're selectively targeting me. He's asking the judge to throw the case out. We'll see if it happens. New York Attorney General Letitia James, you might remember she oversaw charges against Trump. She's been indicted, ironically, for the same thing Trump was accused of when it came to, real estate crimes. Former Trump advisor John Bolton has been indicted for allegedly retaining classified documents. It's going to be hard to say he didn't because he actually talked about it openly, and he published, again, in the drafts, some of these in a book he had. Now, Trump was accused of the same thing. They raided Mar-a-Lago trying to get classified documents. The difference, Trump was the former president of the United States. I mean, he took them still the president, and the president has broad declassification authorities. That got thrown out. The problem is, if you're not president, you don't have those powers. And so taking classified documents, spreading them, emailing them, which he's being accused of doing, it's a much more serious crime. In fact, maybe a crime. And former special counsel Jack Smith also being investigated. He was the one looking into Trump. He was the one making the big conspiracy, tying Trump into a big thing of trying to overthrow the government. January 6th, election fraud claims, the whole 9 yards. And all of this they say to stay in office forever. Well, it turns out that that whole thing ended. And now that the people investigating Trump are the ones being investigated. Now, is that retribution? Is that the weaponization of government? Or is this action to unravel what was the weaponization of government? You decide. The Trump administration, though, their narrative is that we're not weaponizing the government. They weaponized the government, and now they're facing justice for doing so. That they weaponized the entire legal system, they weaponized the intelligence system, they weaponized all the different powers of surveillance, some being used in illegal ways. They demonized the American people. They went after Trump supporters, labeled them terrorists, extremists, and so on, labeled Christians extremists, went after them, tried to dismantle them because they wanted to destroy the MAGA movement, and then created a meta-narrative alleging that Trump and all of his allies were again engaging in racketeering, a big RICO case to stay in power. That's the allegation, right? And of course, it's now being shown that in the formation of that entire system to take down Trump and his allies, many crimes were committed. Illegal spying, for example, again, destruction of evidence, getting false testimony, withholding key evidence in court cases, denying people facing charges exculpatory evidence, manufacturing cases in some regards. That was shown in several cases. And again, trying to create a meta-narrative, it seems, to go after Trump, even giving false statements, which is entered, of course, as evidence. Now, is that a conspiracy or not? We'll find out. But the big part with this, all the people facing charges now, they were all involved in some way with the attacks or the investigations on Donald Trump. Although not all are facing charges relating to that, some are facing charges on other things. But What's also important when you're being criminally investigated? If you're facing criminal investigations, what does that mean? You might be facing criminal investigation for something small, maybe tiny little crime, nothing big. What does it mean when they open up an investigation? It means they get your records, they get your phone calls, they get your emails. They're able to investigate you in ways they couldn't before. And guess what? Sometimes when they're doing those types of investigations, they find other things. And that could be the big piece we're seeing with these investigations right now. And that ties into something else as well. Reuters has what they say is an exclusive story. I'll explain more on that. An exclusive story, they say, alleging a group of U.S. officials with the Trump administration is working to investigate anybody, everyone, who is tied in with what they call the weaponization of government. And if we understand what that means, basically every person we just mentioned is being accused of some form of that. Now, Reuters says this: a group of dozens of officials from across the federal government, including U.S. intelligence officers, has been helping to steer President Trump's drive for retribution against his perceived enemies, according to a government records and a source familiar with the effort. Now, again, is this retribution? Or is it, Trump just going after the people who tried to weaponize the government against him? Depends which side of the aisle you're on, really. But it says this: the Interagency Weaponization Working Group, which has been meeting since at least May, has drawn officials from the White House, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Justice and Defense Departments, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Department of Homeland Security, the IRS, and the Federal Communications Commission, meaning they're investigating likely foreign connections for the CIA, cross-state crimes with the FBI, financial crimes of the IRS, communication crimes with the FCC, possible other things, because they can, with these agencies, basically it's everything. They're investigating basically everything, and they're meeting on this. And again, it's even not just these, it's even other agencies, and they're attributing this to information from 2 documents that have been provided to them for some strange reason. Now, I'll add to this something else. This actually, I'd say, is not some big exclusive story. This isn't some big rumor. This is actually what we know is happening. And why do we know it? It's not secret. You might remember when Donald Trump first took office, what did he do? One of his first moves as President of the United States in 2024, when he came in, again through the 2024 elections, as soon as he came in, he launched investigations into any and all forms of the weaponization of government during the entire Biden administration. He wanted them to go back 4 years and literally look into every single case for any evidence of the weaponization of government. Let me show you. This was one of the day one orders signed by President Donald Trump, and this is the executive order directly from January 20th, 2025, as soon as he came into office. Here's what it says. Purpose. Trump said the American people have witnessed the previous administration engage in a systematic campaign against its perceived political opponents, weaponizing the legal force of numerous federal law enforcement agencies and the intelligence community against those perceived political opponents in the form of investigations, prosecutions, civil enforcement actions, and other related actions. Meaning, many of the people who were investigated, even if they were, again, accused of different crimes in the end, were investigated as an extension of a system to politically persecute people in the United States. If you were on the wrong side of the aisle, the wrong side of the narrative, maybe you were investigated. And that wasn't just legal investigations, that was extra-legal investigations, for example, through the intelligence community. Trump said this, quote, "These actions appear oriented more towards inflicting political pain than towards pursuing actual justice or legitimate governmental objectives." Meaning, look, again, you might have some people who are charged with legitimate crimes in the end, but it's fruit of the poisonous tree. The fruit that was born, again, by this tree of investigation was itself in poisonous soil. The tree itself was grown through extrajudicial methods. It was grown through illegal methods. And even if the fruit produced was, again, hey, this person did X crime or Y crime or Z crime, the entire thing stemmed from an illegal investigation, meaning even people who've been criminally charged, even people who've been found guilty of crimes, it could all get thrown out if it's shown to be part of a system of the weaponization of government. Political figures, media organizations, the whole nine yards. Many conservative news outlets were investigated under the Biden administration. Many journalists faced charges. Many public officials faced charges. Parents protesting at school board meetings were facing investigations. Was all of this an act of the weaponization of government? Well, they're currently investigating it, so we'll find out. But Trump said this: many of these activities appear to be inconsistent with the Constitution and or the laws of the United States, including those activities directed at parents protesting at school board meetings, Americans who spoke out against the previous administration's actions, and other Americans who are simply exercising constitutionally protected rights. He notes this: the prior administration and allies throughout the country engaged in an unprecedented third world weaponization of prosecutorial power to upend the democratic process. And Trump said it targeted individuals who voiced opposition to the prior administration's policies with numerous federal investigations and politically motivated funding revocations, meaning people, businesses, whatever, lost their funding, various forms of retribution, punishment, censorship. We found they're even censoring people on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, everything. All of it, apparently, at least according to Trump, may have been politically motivated. And he said, which cost Americans access to needed services. And he said this as well: the Department of Justice even jailed an individual for posting a political meme, which is true. You had an individual who was arrested, charged, was facing long prison sentence for posting a joke in the 2020 elections. And again, saying, you can go vote in a certain way. It wasn't true. And the irony is you had people doing on the other side of the aisle, they never faced charges, right? Selective prosecution. Got thrown out, by the way, because of that. And he notes that while the Department of Justice has ruthlessly persecuted, or prosecuted, the same thing, more than 1,500 individuals associated with January 6th and simultaneously dropped nearly all cases against BLM rioters. So while January 6ers were thrown in the gulag, denied exculpatory evidence, thrown in solitary confinement, facing various types of abuse, BLM rioters were able to burn down buildings, murder people, injure police officers in much, much greater scale than anything even close to January 6th. Almost none of them were arrested. Almost none of them faced charges in the end. And those who did, well, a lot of them even got paid because they turned around and sued. Very different ends, right? So Trump said, therefore, this order sets forth a process to ensure accountability for the previous administration's weaponization of the federal government against the American people. And what does that actually mean? What are they actually doing? Well, let me show you. This is what he set in motion. Ending the weaponization of the federal government. A, the Attorney General, in consultation with the heads of all departments and agencies of the United States. Let that sink in. The Attorney General, the justice system, consulting with the leader of every single department and agency of the entire country. Quote, all departments and agencies of the United States. That's how big this is. That's how big this investigation is. Quote, shall take appropriate action to review the activities of all departments and agencies, every single one of them, exercising criminal or civil or criminal enforcement authority of the United States, including, it says, but not limited to, the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission over the past 4 years, and identify any instances where a department's or agency's conduct appears to have been contrary to the purposes and policies of this order, and prepare a report to be submitted to the President through the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and the Council to the President with recommendations for appropriate remedial actions to be taken to fulfill purposes and policies of this order. Meaning, they got to look for any instance where one of these agencies communicated with literally all or any branch of government. If they got a notice, hey, investigate this person, hey, censor this person, hey, criminal referral against this person, raid this person, pre-dawn raid, investigate this person, they can flag any of these as a case of potential weaponization of justice. From there it says this, B, the Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with the heads of all the appropriate departments and agencies within the intelligence community. So previously we talked about the surface government agencies. This is for the intelligence community, kind of the black box of our system, working separately. So the DNI is consulting with the heads of all departments and agencies within the IC, shall take all appropriate action to review the activities of the intelligence community over the last 4 years. In other words, the entire Biden administration, and identify any instances where the intelligence community's conduct appears to have been contrary to the purposes and policies of this order, and prepare a report to be submitted to the President. So were they surveilling people? Were they investigating people? Were they framing people? Were they falsifying evidence? There have actually been journalists who've come out and said that they've gotten information that evidence was being threatened to be planted on their computers. You have, for example, Cheryl Atkinson's talked about this before, allegations that they were even threatened to have, like some people said, they were threatened to have child porn planted on a computer to frame them for crimes. Maybe they were, again, looking into them, investigating them, trying to charge them in different ways. Was any of that politically motivated? Was any of that one-sided? Were people on one side of the aisle facing charges but not on the other side of the political aisle? That is what is now being investigated. And so when Reuters says there's this group investigating the weaponization of government, the big plan to take down the deep state, as they're calling it, it's not a secret. Trump actually had an order on it. And what that means, what these new reports coming out saying these investigations are taking place actually mean is it's not empty talk. The investigations are, in fact, being carried out. And that said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. And let's see here. All right. Seymour. You're saying, so you send in your DNA to some place like Ancestry.com where they analyze it and tell you where your ancestors originated. What they didn't tell you was that they sold your DNA to the Chinese and they analyzed it too. So just to be clear, I don't know if Ancestry.com does that. I know some of them do. I don't know specifically which companies. The big thing, though, is they're not really selling it to the Chinese with like the ancestor testing software. They're processing it through Chinese labs, which is one of the bigger problems. When it came to the COVID test kits, when it comes to DNA analysis, like for other things, other programs in the United States, like medical programs, when it comes to some of these systems that, again, check your DNA to find out what your genealogy is, a lot of that is processed through Chinese laboratories. And so it's how the system works. Interestingly, you might remember there was actually an order that came out from the U.S. government. U.S. members of the armed services, if you're part of the military, Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, you're not supposed to do those ancestry tests. I'm not talking about ancestry, I'm talking about just in general, the genealogy tests. You're not supposed to do them, and the reason they actually stated on why you're not supposed to do them is because hostile foreign countries like China are analyzing the data and they're developing weapons for it. And it's not even just like, bioweapons targeting an entire race of people. They can even do targeted assassinations based on your specific DNA. So they could have like a bioweapon for like one person. They could have a bioweapon targeted at like maybe a family or something like that. Because, we all have unique DNA. They can make customized tailored little weapons for this stuff. And that was part of the warning to the armed services from our own government, actually warning them not to take those tests because that is happening. Martin McKenzie, you're saying, for some reason, all this talk makes me think of the movie Soylent Green. Is that Charlton Heston, right? We get so docile and manipulated that we eat our own dead and we don't even matter anymore. You know, the scary thing is it's a downward spiral that I think that a lot of society's been on. Okay, like a case in point. Imagine you're back in the 90s, right? You're listening to, like, I don't know, Michael Jackson cassette tapes. Was he still big in the 90s? I think it was, right? Was that right? Let's say mid-90s, right? You're watching The Simpsons on late night TV. You go to work, you come home, you have dinner with your family. You don't go on the smartphone because they don't exist yet. You're hanging out and you turn on the TV and you hear abortion. And they're saying, well, you know, first 3 months, whatever. You know, Bill Clinton was campaigning on that. First 3 months, first trimester, you know, it's embryonic stage. Maybe it's okay. Imagine if you go into the future and they're talking like full term or like post-birth murdering of a child. Like, how far have we, they're talking about that in several states, not federal level, but state level, they are talking about that. What if they talk about that a baby is, you know, quote unquote aborted, but it's alive, capable of survival, fully functioning little infant, and they put it on a shelf and let it die because they're not allowed to save it. There are laws preventing doctors from preserving the life of an infant. What would you have said back then? Would you have supported that? Would you have been, these are full-on animals? Would these subhumans would actually do that to a child? Or would you be like, hey, great, we've slid very far. We've slid very far. Does anybody remember, like, with video games, when there were video games coming out like the 90s that were like violent, and you had church moms like protesting it. Now it's normal. Nobody protests against anything with that. Violence, sexuality on TV, mass availability of pornography. Things that were very controversial back then are no longer controversial. We take it as normal. We take it as normal. Other examples, euthanasia. Remember when it first, and this is maybe a broader example, more people could probably agree with. Euthanasia. When the narratives first start, what are they? Well, if you're a terminally ill patient and you're gonna die, can you willingly end your suffering? You're gonna die anyways, you're suffering from some kind of horrible disease, and you're just in total pain constantly. And you're like, doctor, I'm gonna die anyway, you know, give me the shot or give me the pills or something like that. You know, that's how it's actually, you know, termed originally. In America, it's, you know, the proposals for it are still on that, right? That's still where we're at with the debate. But if you want to see where we're going, look at Canada, where, you know, death by doctor is one of the leading forms of death. It's one of the leading causes of death. Where they say, well, not just terminally ill, but if you have mental illness. Well, not just mental illness, but if you're suffering from depression. Well, maybe we should even open it to younger people. What if a child is suffering? Should we not let that child kill themselves? And what happens? You start having cases where, like, disabled veterans call up and say, hey, can I get a wheelchair ramp? Good old socialist medicine system. And they say, well, you're a drain on the socialist medicine system. Have you considered killing yourself? Death by doctor. And you're like, well, gee, I didn't consider that. You know, click, thanks. When murder by doctor is considered nothing more than a medical procedure. That's how far it has slid. If you were to go back in the 90s and tell an average Canadian, this is where it's going to go, they would have laughed in your face. You're crazy, eh? Yeah, we won't do that. Well, you crazy conspiracy theorists, that'll never happen. We wouldn't have imagined it. And so it is true that, you know, while we may think that some things are crazy, you have to think on the trajectory because they do have the tendency to expand. A lot of things that are put in place that are insane don't start that way. A lot of them, it's like step by step. It's a little bit, right? Then a little more, then a little more, then a little more. And before you know it, you're doing things that you would have found just completely unconscionable had it been proposed to you in the first place. That is the danger as you start falling down that path, I think, right? Socially. Whether it's surveillance, whether it's censorship, whether it's, again, agreeing to various forms of constitutional violations, you can look at what the original intent was, but you also have to look at where it will bring us, where it will take us. And you have to say, is this worth it? Is the long-term potential consequence worth the short-term remedy to the problem we're facing? That is the challenge, right? Wilma Eden, you're saying government seems to be like knitting. To fix a big problem, you have to unravel a lot of stitches. Yeah. And, this is kind of where I stand with this. If we look at the negative social trends that we face, none of them are new, right? None of it's new. None of the debates we're having are new debates. None of the negative social trends we're facing are permanent. You actually had, look, we can go back to the Roman Empire when you had a lot of these things happening. You can go back even earlier, like Aristotle wrote about some of this stuff in his Ethics. Aristotle, in his Ethics, wrote about social illnesses that could take place, that a society could become perverted. And when they become perverted, they start doing insane things. He was talking of societies, like I believe near Cyprus, where they had like cannibalism of children and stuff like that, existing at that time. And, hey, that's social norm. Some societies believe it was normal. He referred to that as like a regional social ill. A society had become morally sick. A sickness was spreading in their moral fabric. He was talking, we can look, for example, at the Roman Empire. We can talk about mass surveillance. That's a big problem right now, right? It's a big problem. We can look at the reign of Tiberius, a couple leaders after the death of Julius Caesar, before the birth of Christ. The reign of Tiberius introduced various forms of surveillance and social control, basically thought control. Now, they couldn't monitor you on social media, they couldn't surveil you with video cameras, but back then, people went out and talked a lot more, and basically everybody knew you. Has anybody lived in a small town where everybody knows everybody else's business? Like everybody knows everybody's business? It was like that at that time. And when everybody knew each other's business, you kind of knew where people fell, like on the political spectrum or opinions. And if you had the wrong opinion, you could be arrested and murdered. That was the reign of Tiberius in Rome. Even suspicion could have gotten you killed. During the French Revolution, the communist, which again transformed to communism, they weren't at the time, they became communist. It transformed to communism later by several layers. The Committee on Public Safety instituted, again, social control systems, right? The conspiracy of outlaws and so on like that, right? Various forms of investigations into, like, do you oppose the actions of the Committee of Public Safety, right? If you were suspected of not supporting what they were doing, you could be labeled and murdered with the guillotine. They'd chop your head off, right? And so if they suspected you, they could kill you. When that was happening at that time, a lot of people compared it to the reign of Tiberius. If you want to read about the reign of Tiberius, there's actually a book called The Reign of Tiberius, which was even cited a lot during the French Revolution. Anyone who wants to have some good reading material on that. What we're seeing now is just the same exact thing. The difference now, though, is a lot of it is superpowered by AI, where they can sift through mass amounts of information and just flag things automatically. We have like an automated system to flag, criminal conspiracy, unregulated opinion, dangerous opinion, flag. And because, of course, of various laws we put in place to allow for extrajudicial surveillance or whatever else, like the Patriot Act, they can actually get methods to go after different people for dangerous opinions, dangerous ideas, conspiracy, whatever else. Even your tax forms, a lot of it is now sifted by like AI. Everything is flagged and there's no room to move anymore. Where we're going to go if you continue on this trajectory is a society where it is so overregulated that you can't move. You'll be like this. I'll give you one more thing, then I'll wrap up this part. There's a story from ancient Japan where an official is investigating, like, shipments and so on, and they're finding people are stealing little bits of shipments. And the official goes, okay, put a system in place to monitor every single piece that comes through, everything, because we want to prevent this tiny little bit of theft. And his official stops him and says, Your Excellency, or whatever, let me humbly tell you. He said, fish avoid clear water. He says the people cannot live comfortably under constant watch. And while you might have some minor crimes take place, it is not worth the mental and psychological pressure you place on the civilians when you monitor them to that extent. A good system of law maintains some forms of leniency. Just like a good household maintains some forms of leniency. If you're overly strict, you're going to cause rebellion. Every parent knows this. Every government knows this. If you're overly strict, if you're nitpicking every tiny flaw, people will hate you. They will despise you. They will not feel comfortable around you. They will avoid you. That is the danger of the tyrant. The tyrant is not usually wrong. Oftentimes the tyrant has legitimate grievances. Oftentimes the tyrant says this person is flawed, and this person has this problem, and that person has that problem, and this person did this tiny thing wrong, and that little thing, and this thing. The reality is this: nobody's perfect. Every single one of us has a flaw. Do you hate every single person because every single person is flawed? Do we hate our neighbor because they're not perfectly perfect people? Do we hate our children because they're not flawless, because they have tiny little problems? Do we hate our spouses because, they have things like traits that are negative? Do we judge everybody by their negative sides? And do we police everybody according to every minor flaw? That's the danger, right? And so government heads down the same way. I would actually say that you need a degree of leniency to an extent, right? To an extent. Where, again, to a household, a parent has to tolerate, you can't be overly strict. Your kid's going to hate you if you do. They're going to stop sharing with you. They're going to stop being open with you, and they're going to hide things from you. You have to be a little bit lenient and be kind of chill with them. If you have a spouse, you got to tolerate them doing not really stupid things, but some stupid things every now and then. Maybe they're a little lazy, maybe like they have certain traits you just find annoying. You got to tolerate it. If you have a friend and they have a few negative traits, if you want a perfect friend, you'll be friendless. You won't have any friends. If you want to have friends with people, you have to tolerate their shortcomings. Same thing with everything. Kindness, openness, family ties, friendships, social harmony, the social fabric requires us to tolerate some of the shortcomings of those around us. The same applies to law. An overly judicious form of law, a form of overly judicious law will create tyrannies. You could argue that the reign of Tiberius was just enforcing the law. You were okay if you weren't breaking the law, but we remember it as a time of mass abuse. Under the Chinese Communist Party, the narrative is, well, look, follow the law and you have nothing to worry about. The problem is, what do they outlaw? They outlaw opinions, they outlaw political viewpoints, they outlaw religious beliefs, they outlaw just about everything. Follow the law and you're fine. Violate the law and your head gets chopped off. Right? Didn't the Bible warn about this in the end times? Just follow the law. Again, an overly judicious system gives people no room to move, and they will be miserable. People will avoid it. Again, fish avoid clear water. They need the lilies, and they need the reeds, and they need places where they feel safe. And so while you might have some small problems come up without a system of just intense, constant surveillance, the intense, constant surveillance will create social misery. It will create misery. And people will never feel calm. They'll always feel that something is wrong. So I disagree with it. And I do actually agree that the solution to this is a bit of deregulation. This is maybe me being a little more maybe libertarian, you could say. I'm not full-blown like absolute libertarian, but I do believe that an overabundance of law is not healthy for a society. And so I do think that deregulation, the reduction of all these things, makes a more harmonious and more pleasant to live in society, personally. JNS2, you're saying, JNS2 1970, you're saying, are the battles with communism yesterday's battles, or is the enemy now bureaucracy? I'd say that communism is bureaucracy to the maximum extent, so maybe a bit of both. Bureaucracy is not necessarily communism, but every communist society is a massive bureaucracy. Now, some communists would say, well, that's not real communism. Let me explain. Socialism is communism applied in government. Communism is not technically a political system. Communism is like a, if you wanted to break down communism, it's a metaphysical theory. It's like a religion. It's a belief in social struggle and atheism, a rebellion against God, and a belief that through social struggle we can achieve social progress. Survival of the fittest, Darwinian theory, people fight each other in social evolution. We're evolving towards something. They, again, in the more occult side of communism, going back to like Hegelian dialectics and so on, a lot of it was based on this idea that if you get into like the Hermeticists, which was like a weird cult, right? That's part of the formation of communism. If you get into the Gnostics, right? The Gnostics, the Hermeticists, the Rosicrucians, they believed that God was imperfect, and so because evil exists, total misunderstanding of good and evil, because evil traditionally was believed to be an absence of God, not of God, right? It's a moving away from God. It's the loss of divine law, right? That was the old interpretation, but they misinterpreted this. And so they believe that everything is of God, so evil exists, so maybe God is flawed. Total misrepresentation, total misinterpretation of religion, but that's what they said. Again, evil is the absence of the divine in almost all old traditional beliefs. But because of that misinterpretation, they said that the goal of man is to perfect the creation of gods, to create the perfect society, to create heaven on earth, to create the utopia. And so they believe that to create the utopia, what do you have to do? You have to eliminate all of the unwanted. They believe this is part of the progress, the progressive agenda, right? The progressivism towards the final end, which would be the ultimate synthesis of, as the Church of Communism said, God into Satan. That was the actual phrase they used. The Church of Communism was the religious element of communism that kind of debated with Karl Marx. Karl Marx did not create communism, it pre-existed. All right, the merging of God into Satan, what do they call it? The conjunctio oppositorium, right? The conjunctio oppositorium, the merging of opposites. That's what they wanted to achieve. Crazy stuff. So how do you do it, right? You get rid of all the unwanted. You manufacture social unrest. You turn people against each other. You sharpen the antagonisms. When the Catholic Church used to excommunicate communists, the exact phrase they used for why they did it was that communism, quote, sharpens the antagonisms between people. It turns people against each other because they believe that conflict leads forward. The phrase from Hegelian dialectics, conflict leads forward. And if you want to invoke social evolution, survival of the fittest, you need to sharpen the antagonisms between people because that creates conflict, which creates social evolution, which moves us towards the final synthesis of their weird religion, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, and Rosicrucianism, to achieve the end goal of communism. And so when communism is inserted into different factions or different parts of society, it takes different forms. There's cultural communism, there's political communism, there's ideological communism, there's racial communism, there's gender communism, right? All these different things. There's even like religious communism. There's different religions that have actually implemented parts of it. Mostly just reinterpretations of religions. And what they want, back to the point of socialism, when you apply communism to government, it becomes socialism. And the purpose of it is to destroy. It's to destroy, if it's in religion, it's to destroy faith and morality. If it's in gender, it's to destroy gender harmony. It's to turn men and women against each other, make women hate men, or like feminism. Like, I'm not talking like right to vote, I'm talking like communist feminism. It's to turn races against each other, to destroy racial harmony. Communism is a tool to destroy. Its purpose is to create disharmony. Its purpose, as the Catholic Church stated, is to sharpen the antagonisms between various parts of society. That is the purpose. And so when instituted in government, it becomes socialism. The purpose is to destroy the system. The negation of the negation, as Hegel put it. The exact quote, negation of the negation. The destruction of the pre-existing order. The destruction of the system. The negation of the system at play to again collapse it all and create this new man, this new order. Because from the absolute destruction, they believe the phoenix will rise, like the firebird from its own ashes, right? They try to be all like wordy with it. Like a phoenix from the ashes, the firebird will rise, and you'll have communism, right? So that's why they said we never achieved communism. But I would say that when instituted in government, socialism is always bureaucracy, because they want to puppeteer everything. And what does that tell you about bureaucracy? It's made to fail. If you want to destroy a system, institute absolute bureaucracy, you'll destroy it. You will destroy it. Because the people who try to destroy it do that. That's how you know. Martin McKenzie, you're saying the most dangerous phrase, you have nothing to fear if you aren't doing anything wrong. Yeah, that sounds like something a serial killer would tell you, right? When you're in their well pit in their basement, they throw down a little lotion box. You have nothing to fear if you don't do anything wrong. Thanks, buddy. Guess I'll wait till you tell me what's not wrong to do. Who decides what's wrong in a situation like that? You know what I mean? Which is always the problem we have. Who decides what's right and wrong when you destroy when you're not abiding by a traditional moral standard? It is the problem, right? Anyways, folks, let me know what you think. Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think bureaucracy is great? Do you love bureaucracy? Do you think social harmony should be destroyed to create the perfect society? Or do you think this is all insane and we need to fix things? Let me know in the chat. That said, join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for being here. Please don't forget to like and share this video. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.